So, you've read the basic rules and are pretty confident that you have a basic grasp on the rules. Also, your friends are really excited to play this strange D&D, whatever that might be. But something's missing. Something kinda important. Oh, yeah. You kinda need an adventure. Or something else to run for your friends. Well, there are a lot of amazing adventures already published since original D&D came out. So you might want to check out the DM's Guild or Drive-Thru RPG and browse the stuff they have on there. You'll want to search for Tier 1 stuff, which is for low level play from level 1 to 5. There are also a bunch of awesome adventures that are published there for free. So if you don't really want to spend money on this hobby yet, you can also go for one of those. Watia has released a bunch of pre-written adventures and campaigns since 5e released, which run you about $30 to $50 a piece, depending on where you are and how recent the adventure should be. Of course, Watia has released a starter set as well, with the beginner's adventure, The Lost Mines of Phandelver, as well as the Essentials kit with the Dragon of Icespire Peak as out-of-the-box adventures. Both these box sets have a booklet with the basic rules, as well as a set of dice, and a few other things you might need to play the game. So, if you have a bit of money to spend, you can't really go wrong with those. They're basically all you ever need to play, and everything else you can also use the system reference document, the SOD, for a lot of other stuff. I'll leave a link to that down in the doobly-doo. But if you're cheap or just want to make something original that is a completely unique experience for your friends only, you'll want to create your own adventure. Just a quick note, no matter your choice, pre-written or original, what counts is you and your friends having fun. So don't let yourself be belittled by the people, especially online, that scoff at the notion that you use pre-written material. There's probably a reason most of them can't keep a group for long. But you're new to D&D and you're not sure what to do or what to look out for when coming up with your own stuff yet. Well, that's what this video is hopefully for. Basically, you can divide adventures into 4 archetypes, or at least I do. First, the dungeon crawl, where the party explores the titular dungeon of any kind really to find riches and that sweet, sweet loot. It doesn't have to be a literal dungeon, or even any kind of building or cavern. It can be a hedge maze or a forest where people vanish in, or anything else that might hold riches, monsters, and a lot of space where people can run in circles. Second, the mystery, where the party has to solve some kind of, mystery or riddle that requires them to interact with NPCs, as well as probably use their brain muscle to do something. Third, the socializing, in which there really isn't a mystery to be solved or a dungeon to be overcome, but instead some kind of social occasion to be overcome. Hopefully without your character painfully realizing that they're actually socially awkward and really rather kill all the other people in the room. just to not have to interact with them. And fourth, the in-between. Basically a bunch of all of the above. A mysterious dungeon, for example, that in order to get into, you first have to interact with a bunch of weirdos who know how to get to it. For example, maybe a secret vault hidden beneath a city. Or a dungeon of a mad mage hidden beneath a city. So, let's look at each of them a bit closer, shall we? But first, let's quickly talk about inspiration. Not a mechanic, the other thing. Maybe it's a book, a movie, or a TV show you really, really like. That immediately popped into mind when I mentioned inspiration. Maybe not. Who knows? Not me. You might be tempted to rip off the story of this thing and present it to your players. But when you do that, you have to remember something very, very important. You're not the only person writing this story. There are a few others that also have a say in what happens. Namely, your players. And that means even if you want to recreate, say, John Carpenter's The Thing, it'll probably fail if you want to be 100% true to the story. Because the players are the ones that are driving what's happening in the story. And that they can go off the path you envisioned really, really quickly. Doesn't mean, however, that you can't take certain plot points and aspects from your favorite media of choice and insert it into your campaign. Like, maybe the adventure isn't set in an abandoned polar station and the party is a bunch of pretty much screwed scientists and one Kurt Russell. Maybe instead the thing is some kind of arcane superweapon and that needs to be stopped, or it might as well be the end of the world. I play in this campaign actually. It's fun. Or let's take another movie and see what we can take from it. Let's see, how about Tron? Or, even better, Tron Legacy. Wait, what? That's sci-fi. How can I put that into my game? Well, let's see. And I'm just kind of spitballing here while writing the script. Okay, the grid isn't a computer system in which a buttload of programs live and have personalities that reflect those that made them. Instead, the grid is the library, or better yet, the pages, where books and scrolls look like a copy of their author. And the owner of the library, not Flynn, has suddenly gone missing. And the party has been contracted by, let's say, not Flynn's friend, not Alan, to find the wizard. Of course, nobody knows that he is trapped within the library. But what not Alan does know is that not Flynn was last seen in his library about 5 years ago, and he was laboring over an old magic tome that he found recently. And when the party goes there, not Flynn's library is empty. And one of them will be nosy enough, I'm sure, to look at that old magic tome that is kind of strange. And maybe, just maybe, they even touch it, triggering it and teleporting the whole group into the pages of the library and probably turning them into papery versions of themselves covered in text scrolls that maybe reflect some inner truth about them. Who knows? And from there, you could say that Not Flynn's spellbook is the ruler of the place and has Not Flynn under his control. And they have to fight to get out of the pages and free Not Flynn. Easy as that, isn't it? And as you may have noticed, that is also an in-between, because it's a mystery and a dungeon. Okay, now we can talk about the kinds of adventure. The dungeon. Well, as the name might suggest, there is probably going to be a dungeon, cavern, or some other sort of building or underground location. But that isn't at all necessary. Like I already said, it doesn't have to be that, but can instead be something you can easily get lost in, or even just a confined space that has rather defined edges and cannot be escaped without overcoming some challenge. Probably. At least that's what I would say a dungeon is. Alright, listen. There might be a theme here where I'm kind of just talking BS all the time, and that could be that I just don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm pulling all of this out of my you know where. The concept of a dungeon can be stretched pretty far, so it doesn't even have to include stuff like monsters to fight, traps to fall into, or a green devil head that you can toss your friends into for them to be annihilated for all eternity. But instead it can also be just a framework for a bunch of encounters of any kind, really. The concept of the dungeon is a very malleable one that you can adjust to whatever you think best for your current situation. Of course, the classic dungeon probably looks something like this. But where do I get the dungeon, you may ask? Well, thanks to the wonders of the internet, there are a lot of tools out there that can either generate a random dungeon for you or give you a nice way of making your own dungeon. I'll leave a link to that down in the doobly-doo. Or you could just use Google image search and search the term dungeon map and use whichever strikes your fancy. And for the stuff that lives in the dungeon, ask yourself what you think lives there, if you haven't already got an idea what kind of monsters you want your friends to fight, and place them randomly in whole dungeon, rooms, hallways, wherever. And then, just to be sure, check the rooms with Kobold Fight Club, doobly-doo, to make sure you don't accidentally overestimate your party and just murderize them entirely with the first encounter. Unless that is what you set out to do, in which case, more power to you? Don't kill your friend's character just to be mean. I mean, Tomb of Horrors basically started out like that. And it's a cult classic. The mystery. To my understanding, when you have a mystery, you have one or more central questions that need answering. Where did Not Flynn go, for example? Answering them is most likely the main objective of the adventure you want to run. So then, we already know the main component we need to kick this off. Of course, just a question to be answered isn't enough. You, as the game master, should, of course, know the answer to the question, or at least what turns out to be the thing that it's leading to. Also, just call it a question doesn't mean it has to be a literal question with a question mark at the end. Like, what's the answer to the series of riddles that is blocking our way? Or how are we going to cross that mountain range without getting blown off by that evil sorcerer on his tower? Although the latter one might also be just the reason why there is a dungeon to be explored. You never know. But as I said before, many but not all mysteries have also another element that's crucial to it being solved. NPCs. Cause Murder on the Orient Express wouldn't be nearly as interesting if it was just Hercule Poirot. And a dead guy in that train. I'll get to that soon. Mysteries are, in my opinion, the backbone of a long-running campaign, because usually this allows the DM to have small bits of the answers strewn throughout the world and throughout the adventures the party goes on. The socializing. After all, we're playing a role-playing game, aren't we? There needs to be ample opportunity to roleplay. Here's also something else that's very important that comes into play now. Knowing your players, and not just on a personal basis. Not everybody's equally comfortable about speaking in character, and that's perfectly okay. Don't force roleplay on a person that's not that into it or not really comfortable with it, and let them roleplay in their pace and on their terms. Just because some shows online do it exclusively doesn't mean that's the one true way of playing a character, and especially role-playing. Everyone got a different pace, and that sometimes means that this person is more comfortable with talking in third person rather than in first person, and use indirect speech rather than directly talking to somebody. But what I've noticed is that if you, as the DM, talk a lot in character, which itself is pretty rough at the start, I get it, the others will also usually warm up to the idea of speaking in character. Just don't pressure them into doing it, especially if they don't seem to want it, which should be obvious, but just to be safe, I repeat it now. Of course, you can lump in mystery and socializing into one pot, but I think there are two different approaches to be taken in either situation. Especially since the mystery doesn't rely nearly as much on NPCs as the socializing does. Sure, they help the mystery to be more engaging, but the socializing adventure basically lives and dies with the NPCs, because having to infiltrate the ball of a noble family to gather intel on them would be pretty boring if there weren't any actual NPCs to interact with for the party. Because they might fuck up and talk themselves into a really, really, really bad position. So, what makes an NPC compelling and interesting? I'll come back to you when I have a NPC that is compelling and interesting. But until then, look at supporting characters in your in media and what makes them compelling and interesting. Usually they have some kind of motivation of their own, and we don't always get to know the whole story about them. That's probably a good starting point for a NPC you want to use in your game. What are their goals when interacting with the party? Just remember that they don't become the main focus of the campaign, as that can get boring really fast. And the players are the main characters of the story, nobody else. Like I said, NPCs are the supporting characters to main character players, the in-between. Alternatively, the mix. The in-between is a combination of 2 or 3 of the previous archetypes. I already mentioned my totally not a ripoff of Tron Legacy as an example for the in-between. And if you do it on a small scale, it can last for a few sessions. On a large scale, it can be a whole campaign. On the other hand, most long-running campaigns will sooner or later become an in-between, simply for variety's sake. But let's look at the 5e adventure / campaign Curse of Strahd as an example for no other reason than I actually own it. And it is pretty awesome and fits my points really well. I'm basic like that. First off, the dungeon aspect of it is pretty straightforward, as the players are trapped in the domains of dread, namely Barovia. A small valley surrounded by deadly magic mist. I'd argue that this is the dungeon all of Curse of Strahd takes place in, especially if you go by my definition of a dungeon, being a place that has clearly defined edges and cannot be escaped without overcoming some kind of challenge. In this case, either kill Count Strahd von Zarovich or convince him to let you leave. Also, there's a bunch of other dungeons in Barovia, like the aptly named Death House, to introduce your group to what awaits them in this hellhole of a valley that is totally not Transylvania. Next, the mystery is pretty much the main questline of Curse of Strahd. Why does Strahd want Irina, and where is it safe from him? But there are a bunch of other mysteries throughout the story, including the most important one. How do we kill that vampire in his fancy castle Ravenloft? Wow. All of them need to be answered in some way or another to be able to leave the dungeon that is Barovia. And then we come to the socializing part. Basically, the whole valley is filled with interesting characters that want one thing or the other from your players. And that can, depending on your group, lead to so much roleplay it might grossly outweigh the other aspects, like it happened in my game. So, how does all that stuff help you? Well, I did go on without saying much the last few minutes, didn't I? The intention was to give you your basic framework from which you can develop your own story. So if you want to make your own adventure, you have the basic types of adventures to choose from, if you're not sure where even to start. And then you can go out from there. And if all else fails creatively, just straight up steal my suggestion for Totally Not Tron Legacy. I'll leave a short description for it down in the doobly-doo as well. Alright, but remember, it's still pen and paper, so there is this very real danger that you will fail utterly when it comes to running the campaign you envisioned. Doesn't mean your game isn't really great for your players though, does it? No. Bye, and have fun playing.